Joining us now, our Justice reporter Evan Perez and our Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto. Evan, it appears now, based on all the information, the reporting you guys are doing, all of our sources suggesting that the shooter, in this particular case, the husband, the man, was in fact radicalized and had some sort of international connections. What are you hearing?
Well, these are the things that the FBI is definitely following up on at this point, Wolf. They want to make sure they understand what those connections were. There's nothing yet that has shown up that indicates any kind of order from an international terrorist group or any kind of nexus, really, with international terrorism. But the fact that they do believe that there's indications that he was radicalized, and some of that really started turning last night when they found this IED bag inside the scene of the first shooting, the place where the conference center where the first shooting occurred, and it's just a setup of that. And then once they went to the house, the home, and they found that what was a rudimentary bomb lab, essentially, where they found these additional 12 what appeared to be the makings of pipe bombs and ingredients to make more. Those are the things that really tipped the scale here for law enforcement to indicate that they thought they were dealing with somebody who was radicalized, who had at least part of the intention here was terrorist motives. Now, that doesn't perhaps explain everything, because there is the explanation of there's no explanation of perhaps the fight that he got into or the disagreement that he stormed out of before the shooting began. So again, that's part of what's puzzling to law enforcement here.
And we're learning more about their travel, their arrangements. This couple, Syed Rizwan Farook and the wife Tashfeen Malik, 27 years old, she 28 years old. That they had traveled to Saudi Arabia. Now the FBI agent on the scene over there, David Bowdish, just telling us they had also gone to Pakistan.
This is what they do now. They look at foreign travel and foreign communications. So now we know they've been to both Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Neither of those countries travel to neither of those countries by itself establishes a terrorism connection, but it's something they look into because we know the history of both of those countries. But they haven't established that yet. It's not conclusive, but they're exploring it. Same with the international contacts. You know, to have those contacts overseas by itself, loads of us have contacts overseas, is not incriminating. That said,
an immigrant family.
Immigrant family from Pakistan. Right. Originally, he married, you went to the Hajj in Saudi Arabia. Right. Those trips could have had innocent explanations. That said, there are also other explanations. And as you say, some of those foreign contacts were with known, not necessarily senior terrorist subjects, but known terrorist subjects, things to further establish. But it's interesting as you look at this. I mean, the patterns here, you know, intelligence will always look at patterns, both before and after, to try to prevent attacks and explain attacks after they happen. Some of the patterns here fit, at least credibly, previous attacks we've seen, where you have radicalization either by a combination of foreign travel with social media or long-distance contacts, or one or the other. So that's a pattern that we've seen in the past. What is interesting about this attack is that it breaks a pattern in a couple of ways. One, to have a man and a woman involved in the shooting, right, and even beyond that, a husband and wife who carried it out. Some of this is very new, but the other pattern that it does fit is we saw in Paris. We saw 2 weeks ago, multiple shooters attacking a soft target. This fits that pattern as well. Not conclusive, but it fits a pattern that we've seen past in international terrorism.
And what the FBI agent, the FBI assistant director on the scene, what he just told us, Evan, is that in July of 2014, he brought her to the United States. She's originally apparently from Pakistan. They came to the United States as an engaged couple. They got married in the United States, and much more recently, they had a little child.
Right, and she traveled on what is known as a fiancée visa. Essentially, she was coming here to marry him, and that they since had a family. She's become not a naturalized citizen, she's become a legal permanent resident, and I guess that the purpose here was that they were going to settle down, and then something clearly went wrong. It's not clear what what the explanation is for what turned yesterday, Wolf, but it is part of the puzzle that they're trying to put together here.
The weapons in this particular case, these long guns, as they're called, they were purchased apparently legally, right?
That's right. Both the handguns, our information, and the long guns were purchased legally. The handguns by Farook himself, the long guns by a third party, which they haven't established a connection to. California does have laws against certain assault weapons, including the AR-15, the AR-15 type weapon that was involved in this. It is, but the police did not say, they did not establish whether it was indeed legal illegally purchased. That's something.
Well, yeah, one of the things that what I was told last night was that they have traced the handguns to Farook. The long guns were being traced to someone who was a former roommate, Wolf, and that person now is going to be talked to by the ATF. They have no indication that that person had anything to do with the shooting, but it is an interview that's going to be taking place very, very soon.
And here's the other thing, beyond the weapons themselves, the rounds. I mean, by my count, more than 6,000 rounds of ammunition. They fired about 75 at the party, another 76 at the officers during the standoff.
With a clean background, nobody will question any of these. Yeah. You can buy as many bullets as you want. Nobody will question.
Well, think as well, it also sticks out 4 high-capacity magazines. That's a very sensitive subject, because that's one thing that gun control advocates have talked about zeroing in on, high-capacity magazines as something that
what intelligence sources, law enforcement sources have said to me is that as much as you worry about the guns, in this particular case, the improvised explosive device, if you will, the pipe bombs, whatever they were tracking. They had an arsenal at that house.
Where did the black powder come from? I mean, these are questions that now they're trying to nail down of where the ingredients for these bombs were not very sophisticated, but he did have an idea of what exactly he was doing.
And they are right out. They are literally right out of ISIS and other groups' recipe books, right? Because they put this out in their magazines, such as Inspire. They had articles saying bombs that you can cook in your mom's kitchen, right? Using widely available materials, and we saw that.
Do it yourself.
Well, exactly. They used a remote control car, it looks like, as a detonator. We saw in Paris, they bought their detonators at a fireworks store. Right. So these are widely available things you could bring together to make very deadly.
We remember that article in Inspire, How to Build a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom by Anwar El-Awlaki, as I seem to recall. All right, guys, thanks very much.
The FBI is closing in on the motive for this vicious massacre. Top of the list, the FBI is hunting for any ties between the killers and either ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Have they found any? Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins me. Catherine, have they found any?
Well, one of the central pieces of evidence that the FBI is looking at are these pipe bombs. The pipe bombs use components from these remote-controlled radio toy cars, and this is the signature of the group Al-Qaeda in Yemen and their online magazine Inspire, which is kind of like a lifestyle journal for would-be jihadists. It's everything from how to live your life, be respectful to your faith, and then also how to build bombs. So this is a data point that would lead us to Al-Qaeda.
All right. We're looking at the new DMV photo, by the way, of one of the killers, the man, and obviously. Right. Catherine, is there any indication that ISIS, even on social media or anything, has shown any support for this or contributed in any way?
Right. Well, this has been a classic situation where ISIS has been cheerleading for what has happened in California and sort of triumphing or reveling in the fact that so many Americans lost their lives, but significantly, there has been no claim of responsibility. Just further on Trace's point, we actually independently confirmed here at Fox that Syed Farook was in contact with individuals who were being investigated by the FBI on terrorism issues, but our understanding is that he had contact with this group after those FBI investigations had closed. It was very reminiscent, based on our reporting, of the situation in Boston. Remember, the elder Tsarnaev brother was looked at by the FBI, the case was closed, and then it was after that he went overseas and came back and did the attack.
I'll tell you what was peculiar. I was listening to a police scanner right after it broke yesterday afternoon, and I heard one person say, one police officer say to another, we have a tip, and they said the name was Syed. And I just sort of dismissed it, except that I told somebody in New York they're looking for someone named Syed. Never heard anything more. So they knew about this guy as a possibility very early on, unless there's more than one Syed.
Right. They had a tip from someone who was one of his co-workers who saw him and survived and identified the name. That's what went out over the scanner. The original name was not Syed Farook. There were 2 other names that were attached to it at that time.
All right. Money. Where did they get the money for this?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know where the money came from, but they had to have significant cash to buy the ammunition, get the weapons, and then to make these bombs. I want to emphasize the number of pipe bombs they found really speaks to someone who has experience with explosives and is good enough that they're not having accidents to get found out. So that's another important data point here. They're going to find out in the scrubbing of these electronics that are being brought to the FBI lab here in Quantico, Virginia. So the cells, the computers, the thumb drives, what their pattern was on the web. They're probably going to be able to pull up bank records from that as well.
All right. Well, we're just getting into Fox News, a copy of their marriage certificate. They were married on August 4th, 2014.
Yeah, as soon as they met in Saudi Arabia, they were there for 9 days. They returned to the United States. They had 90 days to get married, and they made it official once they were here.
And, of course, Saudi Arabia was a red flag for all of us. Anyway, Catherine, thank you.
to speculate on it that way, because the information in the reporting is confirming that. If we can bring in Justice Correspondent Evan Perez, we're getting new information now that authorities, after looking in that house, as Victor was suggesting, not just perfunctory but probative, they were getting in there, finding information that leads to a different picture of this, that takes us far away from the idea of anything random in this and to what specifically the intentions of this man and his wife were. What have we just learned?
Well, Chris, I think it's really a complicated picture. It's kind of what the president said just about an hour ago. We do know that law enforcement officials do believe that there are indications that Syed Farook was radicalized. Now, they believe that that could be at least part of the motivation for why this shooting took place yesterday in San Bernardino. That doesn't explain everything, however. They still believe that there might be some indication of a workplace motive, some kind of workplace beef that at least may have triggered or played a role in what happened yesterday. So some kind of hybrid explanation what happened yesterday. We do know that officials have found indications that he was in touch with and had communications with at least one terrorism suspect, somebody who was being looked at by the FBI, and that the FBI was already investigating, and that there were some communications over the phone, by social media, that are now being analyzed simply to try to figure out whether or not that also played a role in this radicalization and in what occurred yesterday. We also know that they're looking at some overseas communications. Now, we don't know whether that indicates that that anybody was ordering what happened yesterday to occur. Again, there's no indication of that yet. We do not know of any international terrorism links, but again, that's something that the FBI is trying to chase down and make sure that they understand exactly how that fits in. Again, the thing that the FBI is trying to make sure they do is not foreclose any of these possibilities. We know that they found, for instance, some kind of homemade bomb lab. We know that they found a backpack at the scene of the first shooting, Chris, and apparently this is where he made these bombs. This is something that he had rigged together with a remote control car and was intended to detonate yesterday, and did not happen. We don't know exactly why that did not happen. So again, these are all the pieces that the FBI is putting together. Indications of radicalization, however, is what has moved the FBI and the president to make this an FBI investigation